You're better to start somewhere. To be honest, even if you have completely the wrong data or really incomplete information, you're better to start asking the questions, see what you do know, and then how can you kind of improve from there and over time figure out what matters and figure out the visibility you need.
Purposely podcast, amplifying the stories of people who are making a positive difference to society and the environment. People inspired by purpose. Here's your host, Mark Longbottom.
A really warm welcome to Purposely with Maria English, Chief Executive of Impact Lab, founded in 2019 by Maria's father, Bill English. He's a former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and a woman called Emily Mason, a public policy expert. Impact Lab are in the business of measuring impact. Positive impact of programs delivered by charities and for-purpose organisations, and they do this by analysing the social return on investment, which Maria goes into. A fascinating interview where Maria shares the journey to becoming a chief executive, what it's like growing up with 5 brothers and having a dad in the public eye who then becomes your boss. Before we dive into the show, can I just ask, whatever platform you're on, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, hit that follow button. Really makes a difference. Enjoy.
This episode of Purposely was brought to you by Benevity, the all-in-one software solution that benefits employees, customers, non-profits, and society.
Let's get back to the show. Maria English, welcome to Purposely Podcast. You're the CEO of Impact Lab. What's your mission? What do you do?
So our mission is to help make investment work for communities so that people can live the lives that they choose. And we do that by supporting decision makers in the social sector, charities, philanthropists, government and businesses to connect with information that they can trust, use and learn from to do good better. So it's all about getting a flow of information to support decision making.
Best described as an agency, and you walk alongside those people that you just described?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And just give us a bit of context about how big the team is and how they operate.
So it's always changing. We've got about 18, 19 people at the moment, mainly based in Auckland and Wellington, but working all across the country. We work with, I think it's over 200 different partner funders and social sector organisations. And yeah, I guess we're kind of a mix of, we kind of think we sort of sit in the middle between the world of data and research and the world of frontline community impact. So our team are kind of from varied backgrounds, but kind of focused on understanding the data and the research, but connecting that into the expertise of what people know on the ground so that we can all kind of understand more.
And it makes sense, for people who are donating money, who are philanthropic, they want to understand if they're making a difference and they're having a positive impact. But it's so hard. Like, it's an age-old problem trying to measure the impact they're having, especially when you get into social issues.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard because people are complicated and life is complicated, and the process of how people make positive changes in their life is not straightforward. It's not a straight line. So it has been, I think, and is pretty challenging to measure and understand. But on the other hand, New Zealand spends, in the philanthropic sector alone, it's like $4 billion a year that we spend with the intent that it helps make people's lives better. And so we really do have a responsibility to try and understand where our investment's going, who's it reaching, how is it making positive change in people's lives, and most importantly, what does that mean for how we make more effective decisions going forward? Because if we don't have that feedback loop, then we're kind of just throwing money somewhere and hoping, but that's not necessarily what's going to make the most difference for the people who really need effective support.
So there's quite a lot of pressure on getting it right, because the wrong feedback loop, if you like, the wrong data, the wrong information could end up probably wasting money, but it could also really impact on people's lives, right?
Yeah, and I think, it's not always obvious what you need to know at the start. And I think people often get put off because it's complicated. We sort of say, well, because we can't know everything, so we won't start because it's sort of it's too hard to get it right. But what we're kind of learning is you're better to start somewhere. To be honest, even if you have completely the wrong data or really incomplete information, you're better to start asking the questions, see what you do know, and then how can you kind of improve from there and over time figure out what matters and figure out the visibility you need.
And so typically your clients dominated by charities doing, or social entrepreneurs doing the impact work, or is it the funders, the people who are funding the impact? Is it dominated either way by any of those communities?
So it's pretty even, I would say. Typically when we're working with a charity or an organisation that's delivering a product or service to the community. But then often there is at least one funder, if not multiple funders, who are supporting that work and that charity. And so it can work really well, particularly where funders can support those charities and frontline teams to kind of do the data exercise and build their data capability. And then the data gets used quite differently between the two teams. So for those who are delivering services, it's often insight about how to tell their story and sort of the evidence that supports the impact they're making for fundraising, but also how do they improve their services from a management perspective. For the funders, I think it's more about understanding almost like the portfolio of giving that you have. And given what your mission is as a funder, how does the way that you're investing actually align to what you're trying to achieve? And what's the sort of mix of types of investment, social risk, confidence of impact that you're getting within your portfolio? So we do quite a bit of that as well.
In terms of like measuring the sort of financial impact, sometimes that's easier. Depending on the cause, sometimes the measure on sort of, if you look at environment, it can be a clearer and more clarity around the impact. But, when you're trying to change behavior or you're trying to change outcomes for human beings, that stuff kind of feels like it's always going to be really tricky to measure. But do you think there's some possibility that we will get closer to measuring the behavioral change and attitude changes and life outcomes when we start to use data more and more sophisticated way? Like that's possibly the way in which we can start measuring the sort of unmeasurable, if you like?
Yeah, so our organising framework is called Social Return on Investment, or SROI, which some people might have heard of. And basically what SROI is, there's a model, there's a lot of inputs and variables that go into it, but what comes out ultimately is a metric, which is for every dollar that's invested in this program or service, what's the value returned to society? And so we're trying to quantify the value of positive change so that we can link it to the dollars that are going in to the program. Now, when it comes to actually how do you quantify or value positive change, there's a lot of challenges to doing that. But what we're finding is you can sort of stack up the value, starting with things that are very known and easy to agree on, and then moving up to things that are more theoretical. So, for example, we worked with a charity that provides counselling and support to families experiencing family violence. Now, we know the cost of police call-outs, court hearings, imprisoning people, and we also know the incidence rates of those things occurring for situations of reported family violence. So we can start to kind of understand that if we could reduce the incidences of family violence, we can reduce a lot of those things from happening, and there is value we can apply to that. Then you kind of move up the stack and you say, well, if a family is experiencing less violence and healthier relationships, what does that mean for the mental health of the family, the school attendance of the children, the ability of a partner to maintain employment? And all of that can flow through into, income and future income levels, but also to people's well-being in a more subjective sense. And that's where we get to the top of the stack, which is the more theoretical valuations of a positive change in state in someone's sense of self or their sense of their own well-being.
So much complexity in that, isn't there, around that unique environment and not overstating, if a charity's got a program they're running and on the face of it, that's having a positive impact on someone's behavior. But there's so many other elements, like when the person goes home, what house do they go home to? What's the family culture? What's their, friendship group look like? All of the complexities of their environment impact on success.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot. I think if we try and track all of that complexity, we're never really going to. Well, yeah, you probably wouldn't start the exercise if we were trying to do it just because it's so hard. And that's what, academics spend whole careers understanding one slice of that. But I think what we can do is take a step back and say, what really matters here and what would tell us or indicate to us that we're on the right track. So to give an example of what you described, we've looked at quite a number of youth mentoring programs. And one of the big challenges with those programs is the family context and the home context of the young person can make a really big difference to how and the way where they're coming from to engage with a mentor. But what we can see is whether or not that relationship persists over time. And we've seen programs where the average length of a mentoring relationship is 5 years. And that tells you something, because it tells you that that young person, irrespective of the challenges in their life, they're valuing that relationship. And also they're seeing that mentor as someone that they can rely on in a longer term way. So I think we can't understand everything, but we can identify a few things that might indicate we're on the right track.
And in terms of running your organization, so, it's sort of in startup mode, if you like it, still, in terms of it's still relatively fledgling. And I imagine you're sort of competing with the big four, I imagine, in terms of, quite sophisticated, well-established organizations who possibly are vying with you for work, paid work. But just to describe the sort of what the journey's been like and the challenges that present in terms of running this type of agency and doing the work that you do.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. So I was really fortunate to join the team. I think I was the second employee. So Impact Lab was started by a couple of people, Bill English, the former finance minister, Emily Mason, who's was a senior policy advisor across government, Fran Wyborn, who's a philanthropist, and a data analytics team called Nicholson. So they kind of got together and said, how can we bring particularly the data that sits in government and the analytical tools that sit in government, how can we take those out to the community and make them accessible to the decision makers who are out there, who know their communities, who could really use this information to support their decisions they're making and the impact they're having. So they kind of started that process. We built, I guess, an MVP of the tool. And then it was really interesting because we tested it with a couple of charities, and we immediately found that we were missing a few things. So we had a nice analytical model. You could plug data in, you could get data out. But what was missing was trust. Why should I trust this model? Why should I trust the data that's coming out? Secondly, us actually being able to understand the real frontline context of the change that's occurring. Because it's one thing to say, well, in theory, doing this can lead to that, but it's quite another thing to sit down with the social worker or the financial mentor who is doing the work and really hear how they do it and what's involved, and then use that frontline knowledge to test the assumptions of the model. And then the third thing was we just found that organisations, they're not really typically supported to gather data about impact. So, often the contracts or the funding lines that organisations have, they might need to report on something, but it's not often that related to the real things that matter for the impact they're trying to have. And so that means that data systems are not that mature, and sort of there's a process of support that's needed to help organisations get the right data or even understand what they already know and how to extract that into a form that can tell them something really valuable. So over time, the journey's really been to build out how do we kind of build knowledge of our customers' context, support them to get the data out, and also improve our models to better reflect reality.
And was that the big realization following the launch that actually it's almost need to take a step back and sort of, help organizations build processes to capture data that wasn't going to impact on their frontline service delivery? It wasn't going to change what they do and their brilliance and to take away from what they're doing. It's sort of add to what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. And generally, it's just giving the leadership of these organizations better visibility of what they are already doing. So, for example, we worked recently with an adult education provider where their data was saying, a very small portion of their learners had community services cards, which we were using as a proxy for having a level of financial need. But when they looked at that, they sort of thought that number looks way too low. And then they looked into it and realized people were required to physically come into their office and present their card to be logged as having one. which people were, kind of embarrassed to do. It was an effort to do. So they've now pivoted to doing that online, and the numbers have shot right up. And now they have a much better view of, or evidence for the fact that they're working with a group of learners who are, financially vulnerable and can really benefit from taking a step forward in their education. So I think it's just getting that visibility is a real iterative process.
And in terms of, I touched on it a minute ago around competing against others to do the work that you do. And also you talked about being plausible or having the people to trust you and your organization. Like, how challenging is that when, you've got limited resources, you're up against some quite established players? Like, tell us a bit about the challenges of sort of establishing a team, finding the right talent, because you're going to need a lot of smart people, right, to do what you do.
Yeah, it's been a real learning curve. And I think especially for the kind of what we do is it's really, as I said, sitting in the middle between the kind of frontline reality. And particularly if we think about the reason we're doing all this work is so that New Zealanders, and particularly the most vulnerable New Zealanders, can get more effective services and more investment and support for them. So on the one side, we need to have a team that really understands, the real experiences of, the parents of the child with autism who are trying to figure out how to keep him in school, or the guy who's just left prison with a bit of a few dollars and not much else and is trying to figure out what to do next. We've got to really kind of engage with empathetically the real experiences of people. But on the other side of it, we've also got to be able to navigate large government administrative data sets, the academic evidence base, the kind of, financial analysis, and just generally the analytical toolkit that we want to bring to the measurement. Yeah, so I think we've kind of over time been figuring out how we can, as a team, build the right skill sets to be able to bring those two things together. Because I think the real power is in having that technical empathy. It's having the ability to link the technical side to a real human understanding, and then listen to the customers we work with and those who are doing the frontline work, and bring them information that's actually useful. Because I think, a lot of people have had the experience of getting a 50-page report or a 500-row table that it's really hard, and especially when you're stressed and you've got a busy job, it's really hard to actually make sense of any of that. So we work a lot as an internal team on how do we simplify how we communicate, how do we present things in a way that's most useful to a decision-making situation. And
I imagine one of the biggest challenges has been identifying talent and then also paying them enough. Like, we've had real talent shortage in New Zealand linked to the pandemic and other issues, but then rampant inflation, which has led to, increased remuneration and salaries. Like, how hard has it been to kind of keep on top of those things and start a business from scratch and grow it and scale it and ensure it does, it impacts and makes a difference? Has that been a challenging part of it?
Oh, yes. It's certainly a real challenge, I think, for anyone running a small business. But I feel like we're lucky in the sense that we have a really exciting mission and pretty unique, I think, in terms of the possibility of getting to do really interesting analytical work, but that is also working with, a lot of frontline teams, and you can draw a direct line between the work that we do and the ability of organisations to enhance their services to New Zealanders in need. So I think we found that's really amazing, because who we're attracting is people who are really compelled by that mission. And almost, I guess I don't know if it's a visceral sense, but just, people who have a really deep resonance with that and resonance with the stories of our customers, because we hear these amazing stories of transformation of people and families. And that, I think, any amount of pay won't compensate for that. And I came from corporate world of management consulting at Boston Consulting Group and so on. And I can certainly say for myself, that's the case. Like, I would trade in any day the corporate life for just the sense of meaning and purpose you get from this kind of work.
Before we change tack, I just wanted to identify that, you're in a unique position because you're a CEO of an organization and you're your father's the co-founder and he's also on the board. So like just identifying that as a unique scenario. But changing tack and taking you back to your earlier years, is there any sort of thing fundamental in the way you were brought up or your earlier years that kind of indicated that, Maria English might end up working in purpose and might end up wanting to serve people in life? Can you think of some things back then, like early in life?
Well, I think I've always been interested in how do you help everyone really to reach their potential, because all of us have this incredible innate potential and it's pretty unique, I think, to each person, but we face pretty different levels of opportunity to actually reach it. And that has always just been really interesting to me. How do you support that?
Where did that come from, do you think, Maria?
It's a great question. I think I was pretty influenced by my little brother, actually. He has a disability, and I think seeing his journey has really inspired me because when he was younger, he had real problems, particularly with his language and his ability to speak. And he was very fortunate to just find a few of the right people who really understood him, could see his strengths, could see kind of how to help him develop those. And as a result, he's just, he's done amazing things. So I think realizing that there might be a lot of kids out there who don't get lucky enough to find those people, and then the difference that makes to their lives and their ability to kind of go after their dreams, that really, I think, was a big impact on me. And then when I was in Australia, which was a little bit later, not in super early life, but when I was in Australia working, I got to work and live for a couple of months in a remote community in Kimberley in Western Australia. And that had a huge impact on me, just sort of, I guess, getting a better understanding of, particularly the children in the community I was in, how the odds were stacked against them. But also there were these incredible people who were just doing amazing work to support children and their families, but they weren't the ones getting the funding. They weren't the ones getting the support and the investment. And so that kind of really, I guess, motivated me.
Yeah. And in terms of, so you're one of 6 children. You got 5 brothers, is that right?
Yeah, 5 brothers.
Wow. That must have been interesting. Tell us about that.
Oh, it was great fun. So much fun. It's weird. Recently, I've run into a few people who are 4 and 1 or 5 and 1. And I always feel like we can connect because it's a really fun way to grow up. Particularly, I think, being the only girl, I was obviously massively spoiled and, had kind of, mum would come and watch my netball and then dad would go and watch 5 different games of rugby and cricket and basketball. So, yeah, I think it was on the one hand being really spoiled, on the other hand, you can imagine getting a lot of teasing and a lot of challenge from my brothers, which I think ultimately was good for me.
Yeah. But your resilience, possibly.
Yeah, and I could never get a piece of toast because the toaster was always occupied.
Does that affect you now? Like you find yourself just hugging that toast pretty close?
Yeah, I'm like, wow, I can just go to the toaster and put a piece of toast in, and it's and it will toast for me. It's a miracle. And
so, because you've had you had a really strong academic career and lots of opportunities. Were your parents? Did they impress on you the kind of the abilities you had and the resources you had and to sort of seize the day and to really grab the opportunities?
Yeah, I think they were pretty relaxed. I mean, I think their kind of view was just, go in the direction that you feel enthusiastic about, whatever that might be for you. And so they didn't sort of, I guess, ever directly lead me towards the social space, but I think I saw what they were doing, and that's probably what helped lead me there because, obviously Dad's done a lot of work in the social policy area, and my mum has also done a lot, particularly in Pacific health and mental health. And so just, I guess, seeing the enjoyment they got out of that work and also their sort of immense respect for the people in these sectors, that really transferred to me. And I remember just hearing these stories of these amazing people that my parents were meeting and the work that they were doing, and just thinking, wow, I would love to do something that's helpful to people like that, because it's often really unrecognized and unthanked work, what people do out in the community.
Yeah, because your mother's Italian Samoan heritage, is that right? And your dad born and bred in New Zealand? Like you have quite a rich heritage within your family?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And in terms of, like, not everyone goes to Cambridge University, right? And not everyone does an MBA at Stanford Uni. But tell us about your thinking when you embarked on those things. Like, were you quite focused on carving out what you saw as, a stellar career? Like, were you quite intentional with that?
Yeah, I think I wasn't, particularly when I was 18 was when I left for the UK. I didn't really know what a career was, I think, but I was really curious to just see the world, and sort of see what's beyond the shores of New Zealand. So that was kind of, I guess a great experience getting to go and live in the UK. And I remember thinking, because I'd seen Coronation Street quite a bit because my mum used to watch it. So I thought, oh yeah, it'll be like Coronation Street. And then I got there and it was totally not like Coronation Street. And it was all that culture shock, of actually just a different society, even though we speak the same language, different society, different ways of working. So that was really, a really cool learning opportunity. And then I think once I got to the US, or what sort of got me to the US, I had a bit more of a sense that I wanted to learn something specific by going to Silicon Valley and, learning from people who are building technology that's making a real impact on the world, for better or worse. But, people are really building things and creating something new that can, help change an existing system. And I did really want to learn that.
And always a sense that you're going to return back to New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't too sure. I spent 10 years overseas, but as I was coming up to graduation at business school, I got kind of surprisingly this just really strong sense that I wanted to return home. And I think part of it was I did some work, like I did my summer internship in a part of a neighbourhood of the Bay Area, which was focused on alternative education for young people in low-income jobs, like minimum wage jobs, trying to get college degrees. And just being in that community, I realised, if I really want to make a difference, I actually need to dedicate myself to somewhere for the long term, because just, rolling in for a year or two, rolling out, you just don't get the level of understanding of the community that you need to be helpful or useful. And I think for me, I just realised New Zealand's that place for me. Like, I want to really build that deep understanding in the same place that I'm from and that my family are.
And all those siblings, it'd be a shame not to be connected to them.
Yeah, but 2 or 3 of them moved overseas as soon as I moved home.
And you're like, what's it like? So your dad's a Sir. He was the 39th Prime Minister of New Zealand. He wasn't in the job too long, but, a hugely successful politician, well respected, liked. But what was it like growing up with a parent who had a profile, had a big job, right? Like, so a proper job. Clearly, you said he got to quite a few rugby games, but what was it like? And was that difficult when you decided to come back to New Zealand? Does that play any part in, like, maybe not wanting to come back to New Zealand, the fact that your family, has a profile?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to know, because I guess it's always been a part of my life, the politics, because Dad was already in Parliament. I can't remember when he went in exactly, but from as long as I can remember. So I think probably just like any other job, as a kid, you just you get exposed a little bit to what your parents are doing and you learn in that way. And so I think I really, it was just interesting, and such a privilege, I think, for Dad and for us as a family, like, to be able to, have those opportunities to just be connected, I think, and interact with so many New Zealanders and see just, in a sense, more of the full scope than you can normally get to see of the amazing things that are happening here. Like, I remember Dad coming home and he'd just met the guy who founded Rocket Lab, but it was when he was in a garage in Invercargill or something. So, it's just seeing that connection to what's happening around the country was, it was really a really amazing thing as a kid to get exposed to.
Were there any crap parts of it? Like, were there bits that you'd rather not experience? Like,
I think probably seeing your dad or your parent criticised as a kid, especially, you read the paper or something, that's hard, especially because, I didn't really understand, I guess, how the political system works when I was a younger child. So I think that bit of it's difficult, but it's also a really important part of democracy, and being able to be accountable. And I think it's really important our political figures are super accountable for their decisions and so on. So I think it's a good thing, but as a child, it can be hard to sort of see that criticism.
And, there's probably a temptation not to join the company that your dad has been co-founder in. And that in some ways is a brave thing to do what you've done. And being I think you mentioned the second employee, but your dad was known as a purposeful leader, known as someone who wanted to make a difference to, people and planet. What's it like having dad as your boss?
Oh, it's awesome, actually. I think because dad comes from a farming family, and so I wouldn't claim that I have any sort of farming skills, but I did work for, aunties and uncles and things over the summers. And it kind of feels a bit like that, which is that you've always got work to be done because the work doesn't stop. And it's just another topic of conversation. It's something that as a family, we've got a shared interest in and we're working on together. And it's an important part of how we get meaning and purpose in our lives. So I think dad's figured out a way to get the experience of farming, despite the fact his children don't have many farming skills. So I think he's done pretty well. But yeah, I enjoy it.
I'm just imagining, so you're heading over to mum and dad's place and, there's some stuff going on with Impact Lab and maybe it's a bit challenging and you might have just had a board reading recently, but do you have any codes of like, Dad, I'm like, that you indicate to him, I'm in daughter mode now and actually you can't talk to me about work, please? Are there sort of secret handshakes or something?
Yeah, no, I think that is important to be able to switch off, because when you're doing work that you really care about, and I think anyone who's started their own business or organization will feel this way. You're so enthusiastic and you can always see the next 10 things that you want to get done. So it can be easy to just always be working, but it's really important to be able to switch off and re-energize as well. So we're working on that, but it is a challenge, especially just because the work is so interesting. It's the kind of thing I would want to be thinking about in my free time anyway.
And, like your, first CEO job, there's not a big team, like a sizable team, kind of making sense of the world in terms of you as a lead, yourself as a leader. Like, what's that journey been like? Because you're kind of thrown right in there from the beginning. You had to sort of develop, scale, and then lead. Like, tell us about that journey.
Oh, it's been a huge learning curve. Bit of a baptism of fire, but I just feel really grateful. Sometimes I have to kick myself, that I even have the opportunity to lead a team like this and doing what we're doing and getting to work with the customers we do of these just incredible charities and organisations. So, I feel really, really grateful. And at the same time, every day I realise how much more I have to learn. Yeah, I think it must just take many, many years to get good at leading something. Because there's so many different skills and different sorts of problems come up every day. So it keeps me on my feet. But I'm just really grateful to get the chance to have a crack. You know what I mean? Have a chance to have a go at it.
You joined the organisation pre-COVID, so just before COVID. So obviously that would have been hugely challenging. What have you learned? Like, what are some of the things you maybe did at the start that you really don't do now? Like, what's the important stuff when managing people?
Wow. Mark, if you have any tips on that, please let me know, because I feel like I'm just at the beginning of figuring that out. I think the first thing is to just recognize that people are different, and just because you think a certain way and you're motivated by certain things, that's not going to be the same for everyone else. So really taking the time to understand who people are as people and what motivates them and how they like to be communicated with, and just sort of adjusting to the needs of the team, I think is really important. And then another thing I think I'm learning is just the importance of clarity of purpose and direction, because what I've found is, once people are clear on the direction, then they'll do so much more than you could have done or thought was possible. But they need to know what direction the boat's rowing in. And that's something I think I have to continually work on, because it's easy to kind of, in the day-to-day with your to-do list of 500 things, like it's easy to lose sight of just the simplicity of what we're trying to achieve and why.
Yeah. And what's been the hardest day in the office leading the organisation?
That's a great question. Oh, I'm trying to think now. I mean, there have been a lot of challenging days. I think probably the first time someone left the team, and it was totally, it was a great sort of career advancement opportunity for someone. But I remember, because I'd never experienced that before, I took it really personally. I felt like, it's like the end of a friendship or something. But what I've come to realize is that you might be an important part of someone's career path, but these days, it's not common for people to stay in one place for a long time. And so just accepting that and kind of supporting and enabling people in their pathways, whatever they might be, that's been something that I've learned, which is just, I think, a really basic management lesson, really.
Yeah. And in terms of what you learned about yourself, like what's Maria English's superpower?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have any superpowers yet. I guess I kind of see myself as able to connect the dots, I think. So being able to link up the sort of different ways that people see things and the different sorts of knowledge that people have, and bringing it together into kind of a shared understanding. So I'm just thinking, at the moment we're working on how do you measure the impact of housing, and particularly, social housing or housing for people who are not in adequate housing. And so at the moment we're drawing together, pretty chunky financial analysis of investment models and cost allocation of what goes into these housing developments. But also we're talking to tenancy managers about the art and the science of how they support people to sustain their tenancies. And we're looking at the science around the connection between housing quality and long-term health outcomes. And, there's just different people and different ways of thinking that go into all those aspects of the challenge. And the thing that I love is just how do you bring those together so that we, at the end of it, we're all smarter and we all have a new way of thinking about what we're doing.
And when you're not working, when you're not leading the organisation, what's time out look like for you? What do you do?
So I'm a bit of an introvert, which is hard because I spend all day talking to people mostly.
You come home really knackered from that.
Yeah, well, I get energized by it. But at the same time, I really like my quiet time. So when I've got time out, I'm reading, I'm going for a walk, I'm having a little jam on my ukulele. I love poetry, so I've got a great book of Joy Cowley poems at the moment, and that's just so nice to just sit and read and sort of just relax. I've also recently got into folk dancing, which I highly recommend. It is a lot of fun.
Fantastic. And as we look towards wrapping up, in terms of the vision for Impact Lab and the work that you want to be doing, like what does the next sort of 18 months, 2 years look like?
Yeah, I think the next 2 years, it's really about just kind of deepening our impact and building more connections across the sector to get data used. So at the moment, I think we've measured about $130 million worth of investment. And, against the $4 billion, which is just in philanthropy, that's only a small portion. So, we would really love to see at scale investment working for communities. And we would love to see that all investment that's being put into the community sector in New Zealand, those who are making the decisions have a line of sight to who it's reaching, how it's making a difference, and are able to use that data to guide their decision making. So for us, it's about just continuing to partner with funders, partner with charities and frontline teams, build out the measurement. And we're also looking at how do we support particularly the funders and investors who are a step back with the right kind of data insight to support them. So we're about to release a report with Jarden Wealth Management, which is an introduction to social return on investment, but also some of the initial insights we're getting from the bird's eye view of partnering with so many different social sector organisations. And out of that, we're kind of shaping up an investment framework, if you like, which is identifying different ways to invest in the social sector, the trade-offs involved, and how to think about how to get the most impact and leverage on the funds that you're putting in. So I'm really excited to kind of bring that conversation, particularly to funders and investors, to help, I think, people, in a sense, just believe it's possible, because it hasn't really been so possible, as you said earlier, to have data inform your decisions. But I think it is now in a new way. So we're just excited to kind of get those conversations going with funders.
Maria English, massive thank you for joining me on Purposely.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks for listening to Purposely Podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review. I hope you like what you're hearing, because I sure do.